Any changes in the last year?
I wouldn't know what to talk about.
The great debate wages on about Peggy Olson's charmed career.
I want you to imagine when you talk about Mr. Draper that he's standing right behind you.
Nothing good ever started with that sentence. Stop writing for other writers.
This big club they're all in together.
I would describe it as delightfully disappointing.
Sex sells.
Says who?
Welcome to Mad Men, the weekly show where we discuss a show that used to come out weekly. Each week, we take a close look at an episode of the AMC series Mad Men, which ran from 2007 to 2015, gearing our conversation around the conversation the show is having about gender, the patriarchy, and belts that cost only $2.55. All right, I have two people here with me, and first one here, Will Ashton, you were crying in the podcast break room, which I have strictly forbidden, but I have to see you anyway.
Oh, I'm a rule breaker, you know. I like to challenge my authority whenever I can, and however I can.
And there's Mike walking down the stairs to some hauntingly sexy music, and I would play it for you all right now, but you know I'm getting turned on. It's Mike Overhaul. So now he's doing the twist again, like we did last summer.
Hey, let me tell you, these moves are the only reason I can be on this podcast is that no one can see it.
And you all know me, I'm John Agoni, and my personality is also a catastrophe. So, boys, we did it. We finished season 1 of Mad Men, and now we're going into the second season. We hit a milestone. It's not easy doing a whole season of recapping a TV show, but you know what? It's not that hard either. We just did it.
Yeah, and to celebrate, we're all hungover.
That's right. We're all a bit hungover doing this on a Saturday morning. Perfect timing.
Yeah.
I'll tell you who isn't hungover: the cast and crew of Sterling Cooper, because this episode is very. This is a very like young and vivacious episode of the show. We have a big time jump, right? We have a lot of commentary here about being youthful and rejecting sort of what's come before. I kind of like how the episode, in fact, this is for those who think young, kind of has that attitude of like, you know what? Forget season 1. We're going to jump 15 months to February 1962. Did you guys, I am curious, like, did you guys know that it was a big time jump? I mean, I'm thinking for you, Michael, like when you were first watching the show, but were you expecting that? Or like, because I could see people watching and being like, okay, so it's Valentine's Day. It's been a couple of months since season 1, but no, it's been over a year.
Yeah, I definitely didn't expect it when I was watching it. I do think it's like the exact right thing to do because I feel like they wrapped up season 1 so perfectly with all their storylines, and they gave just enough to have you be curious about what's going to happen in the next seasons. And I love that with this time jump, it allows those little seeds that they planted to have bloomed off screen. And now it's just like you kind of felt in the first episode of the first season. You're trying to catch up and understand what are the motivations of these characters. What's the power dynamics? I guess essentially in the office, it feels brand new.
Yeah, Matthew Weiner has said that when they were doing season 2, he faced a bit of a challenge because he had told his story in season 1. You know, he wrote it like he wouldn't get a season 2. And I think that, we talked about that when we were discussing The Wheel, that it does feel like an episode that kind of ties up all its loose ends. It's a standalone with series potential, basically. And then he went into season 2 and being like, well, if we're going to do something different, if we're going to start a new story, then it should be about, Don kind of, being faced with the young generation and things changing, because that ties into the show itself. It's time for some things to really change and impact the characters generationally. And that's what we're seeing kicking off here. But what about you, Will? Did you, I know we've discussed this many times that you were getting pretty close to Mad Men material you've never seen before, but this is one of the last couple, right?
I believe this is the last full episode I haven't seen, and maybe I don't know. I didn't really have any clear recollection of this episode, so if I had seen it in full, it did not stick with me in my memory. So it basically felt like I was watching again anew. So yeah.
So then, what was your take then? Since it was fresh for you, how did you respond to it?
I mean, I could definitely tell that the production values seem to have gone up. Not to the point where it's just like night and day, but you can kind of tell that like AMC was a little bit more willing to put an extra 0 or 2 in their budgeting for the show.
Now we're in the Savoy Hotel,
yeah.
one of the biggest, fanciest hotels in New York City.
Yeah, exactly. And it just has a more kind of cinematic quality to it. Not that the first season didn't, but, you can kind of see a little bit more of that cinematic influence that I'm sure is going to be only more apparent in the seasons to come, as well as this season, I'm sure.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, thematically, yeah. I mean, I if I had only, I guess, one complaint, is that like they really hammer home that Dawn is feeling old and out of date. Like it's not a particularly subtle thing in this episode, but it makes sense given where we are and what we were trying to say with this season, at least so far. And there's a lot of other things that are discussed I think are a lot of fun and sad.
Yeah, this is a fun episode. This is a fun one, and I think I do think that there, to what you're saying, it's like there is a bit of like on the nose thematic stuff going on, but I think in typical Mad Men fashion, there's also some like nuance like underneath it too. That's what gets me hooked. But real quick, we'll say so. This is another episode written by Matthew Weiner, so he's back with like the lead credit, and then we also have Tim Hunter coming back as director. Last season, Tim Hunter directed New Amsterdam and Red in the Face and Long Weekend and Indian Summer. So he's definitely one of the mainstays in terms of directors. And Weiner is back. I mean, he wrote a bunch of episodes last season because it's Matthew Weiner. I'll tell you guys, I watched one of the like establishing Mad Men like sort of special features on the DVDs, and I think when we were talking about the show last season, I might have like downplayed a little bit of like how involved the writers' room is, because I was like, when we talk about like who gets the credits of the screenplays, I think sometimes it can get lost that like they're all in the room together, like and not for every single episode, but even though if they're not like getting the exact like screenplay credit, a lot of these writers that we've been discussing, like Bridget Bedard, Tom Palmer, Lisa Albert, a lot of these folks, Chris Provenzano, they're kind of coming in and out of this writer's room, even for episodes they aren't credited on it, is my understanding. So I wanted to shout that out real quick. But okay, back to the episode.
I do think that, to that point, John, I do think it's really important that that's happening, especially that, in the last season and right now, because it doesn't, having watched the full series, it still doesn't exactly feel like, besides maybe Don Draper and Peggy, I'll say, that people like really understand their character. It doesn't feel like it's as easy for them to tap into it and understand how they're going to react in a situation. It feels like most of the show is still figuring that out. And that's why you have to have all those writers like present at that same time to help them figure it out.
No, I think that's totally spot on. I think it's one of the reasons why Mad Men and other good shows like it tend to like have that consistency, is because you do have the old guard and the new guard working in direct collaboration. It's not like they just leave each other alone and not help each other at all. I think that can be just something for TV writers' rooms that, it can be a little bit mysterious. Like every show is a little bit different. We don't always know the goings on behind the scenes, but that tends to be how it works.
Well,
but
I was just going to say, I mean, obviously there is an authorship to the show with Matthew Weiner. Like you can feel his influence and stamp on the show, but, in a meta sort of way, like when the characters are writing ad copy, they do it like as a group, like they're just trying to make the best product they can. They're all kind of consulting all that stuff. And I mean, I don't know for sure if that's how the writer's room operates, but I imagine the way they operate bleeds into the work in some fashion or another. So that's just my hunch.
Sure.
Also,
so
John is sorry. I keep
go ahead.
Before you're in the episode. One more question about the show at large. Are we now at the point when Breaking Bad and Mad Men are running simultaneously, or is that season 3?
That was happening in season 1, I think.
Well, it wasn't it wasn't Breaking Bad 2000, like late 2008. I'll double check that. But I think season 2 is early 2008, and then
I think Breaking Bad's 2007. I think Breaking Bad started filming after Mad Men, but I think they aired around the same time.
Okay, you might be right. I just want to double check here. So, okay, Breaking Bad started airing January 20, 2008. So that was after season 1. Okay. So yeah, I think Michael's right that the season 1 of Breaking Bad I think was already finished by the time Mad Men was airing its second season, because the release date of season 2, and I'll double check so I don't get this wrong. Yeah, it aired July 27, 2008, so later that year.
Interesting.
I think that it influences the production value as well, right? Because that's when AMC is really trying to establish itself as we're HBO. Look at us. We have 2 really good shows, and we're going to put everything we have into it.
Yeah, HBO look out, basically. And for good reason. I mean, these are the 2 shows that really kicked off AMC on its major, climb to prestige television that, later they would get other shows too, like Walking Dead, that would become even bigger hits. But yeah. All right.
So does that mean that the writer's strike had more of an influence on season 2 then, if that was happening around 2007?
Yeah, so I think we kind of talked about this last season, but I think, this is one of those shows that kind of missed a lot of the major consequences of that, because I think they really had season 1 in the can by the time that was coming to bed, and then at this point with season 2, if you look at the writers here, we do have some new talent, but it's a lot of the same folks. So for season 2, we're getting Robin Veidt back again, who I think really came in as one of the strongest voices, in my opinion, for writing these episodes. But then we also have the Jack Mentons are back in this, and then we have some Lisa Albert is back, and then we'll talk about a couple of new ones, like Rick Cleveland joins the writers' room for an episode, I think 1 episode, and then a couple of other people who weren't on last. So yeah, it's definitely different. I think that season 2 comes off very differently, and this episode does too. And I think more of that has to do with the direction that Weiner wanted to take the show after he finished season 1. He finished the story he wanted to tell. So, all right. So kind of like we were discussing before, the show is now in 1962. So we ended the show in 1960, but it was December 1960. And we're picking up 15 months later. It's Valentine's Day. And a lot of things have kind of happened over the last year. And this is something that Mad Men does a lot of over the course of the show. It does big time jumps, because we're covering an entire decade in 7 seasons, right? So a lot of the seasons kind of have huge gaps like this. And one of the things that has happened behind the scenes is, things between Don and his hire as head of accounts, Duck. Things have gotten, pretty heated since things settled down there. Roger is back, of course. There are a few people who don't come back as either guest stars or series regulars. So no Rachel Menken. We don't have Maggie Siff's character in this, Midge. We don't have Marge from the Switchboard. But we do have other people coming in. So Lois Sadler now has a more prominent role in the show. Duck is now a series regular. Lois Adler, I forgot to say, or Sadler. I always say Adler. She addles me is the reason. She's now Don's new secretary. We even see early on in the episode that Don changes, the locks have changed on his door. And I never really read into it much, but it did make me kind of think oh, did he finally get his door lock changed so that Pete will stop going in there? Because it happened 2 times in 1960. So I figured that was maybe a nice little touch there. Good for Don doing that, because he probably doesn't trust Lois too. I wouldn't. And we get reintroduced to all of our characters again, and a lot of things have changed. I want to talk about Betty real quick. What do we think of Betty in this episode? Because she's now riding horses. She's learning so much about party girls. I love that scene so much. Mike, what do you think? Or Will, what do you think?
Well, I want to talk about Betty too, but I was going to say, was there more of a symbolic thing going on with the lock? Because in season 1, we had at the end, Don and Dick were kind of fusing and becoming more open. And there was a sense that he was kind of being revealed, but then obviously, it didn't matter much. And, there was that vulnerability that kind of happened. Then he was able to skirt around it. But now is he kind of being a little bit more reserved again? I was wondering if that was maybe a symbolic thing there as well.
I don't know if I read that into his characterization, it's an intentional thing, because I'm getting a little bit more of we'll talk about it, but I think there's something else going on with the Don character.
Okay,
right now.
I just didn't know if that was just supposed to be kind of a sight gag and a transitional sort of thing, or if that was a little bit more character symbolic as well.
Sure,
but sorry, go ahead,
Betty.
Yeah,
Betty. Loves to ride her horses. Yeah, it's she just everything she does. I don't know why. Well, I do know why, but just everything she does annoys me more. Like I am not a fan of Betty. I feel like maybe the writers are trying to give her independence or something, but like getting into the car with her manure boots, like that's just gross. It's not the same as having kids,
Man.
But well, you got something to say about that, Will?
I don't know. I feel bad for Peggy. Or sorry, Betty. Jeez Louise. I feel bad for Peggy too, but I also feel bad for Betty in this. I don't know. I mean, she just wants to, she wants some loving. And I mean, she's trying to be the best mother she can in some respects, but she also wants a little something extra. And,
I think she wants to be more independent.
Well, that's too,
There's a lot of her like taking charge in this episode in ways we haven't seen before. Like she's just like, you know what, Don, let me order this because like fishy swat.
Well,
are you high?
Yeah.
I mean,
and
yeah,
I agree with her there.
I mean,
she doesn't want to tell Don about her car breaking down. She wants to take care of it herself.
Yeah, I mean, there's something definitely going on with like age as far as like Don is obviously a lot more vulnerable about his age, about getting older. Not only in the workplace, but, physically, we have that scene, with him at the doctor's office. He's 36. He's not a young man anymore, et cetera, et cetera. But Betty weirdly wants to be older. She wants to kind of like not be like a kid with the playhouse. She wants to be a woman of the house. And I found that kind of telling in that scene when they're having dinner before they go into their hotel room. She says, can you imagine people dating at our age? Even though there's like a 8-year gap, I think, between Dawn and Betty, right?
Not 8 years. Like, so she was 28 in the first season, so she's about to be like 30. So there's like a 6-year gap.
6-year gap. But still, I mean, that's, a considerable gap. And, they're not like you're not far apart per se, but, there is a gap there, but she acts like they're one the same. And I found that to be a pretty intriguing part of this episode and her character.
Which is interesting, right? Because, Dawn struggles to get it up. And if you look at what happened in season 1, Dawn had arousal problems with Betty when she was like too much like a kid, right? Like he struggled to like find any interest in her, wanted to end the marriage. Mm-hmm. But now she's kind of like coming into her own. She's a little bit more like the independent women like Midge and Rachel.
Yeah.
But
she's in the laundry room a little bit more, I mean.
Yeah, she is. But no, like something else is going on with Dawn. And I think the episode hints at like 2 things. I want to talk about it, but was there anything else like Betty wise? I don't want to miss anything. But
what was she gonna give that mechanic a blowjob?
She was ready to do it. She was just like
that's what I'm saying. That's why she's ready to do it. And then I didn't feel like he was gonna let her go off without doing it, but he just let her go. I definitely feel like she was implying like, I'm gonna take care of you, and he's like, you could take care of me, and then it was like, see ya.
She was gonna offer some service or another. I don't know what exactly was going to be involved, be it blowjob or what have you. But I mean, she was offering, which I mean, to me, that's just sad. Like it's just like you're just offering to do something or another with this, mechanic that you don't know in the middle of the night, who's clearly, like 3 decades older than you. Like, what's going on here?
3 decades.
Maybe not that old. Maybe it's a little bit older.
He's
older than her.
Late 40s.
Okay, sorry. He just looks, significantly older than Betty.
He's pretty rugged and masculine, though, right?
Yeah, and obviously Betty has a type, as we've seen from not only Dawn, but that guy that came into their house. Sure. She likes a rugged man. Also, the guy on the horse, she seems to have some infatuation with, even though he's younger. A little bit.
I think more of like she sees him as a kid.
That's okay, maybe so.
But I mean, if we're talking about that, I mean, there's Glenn's.
Yeah, yeah. Kid is Betty's fucking type. So.
Gross. But in terms of Dawn, so Betty is kind of presenting herself right as this like sex object, right? She has like the lingerie. She's kind of trying to, clearly they've been having issues, because when he fails to perform, she's just sort of like, we had too much to drink. I don't know where I am, like I just wish you would tell me what to do, and that's like, brutal for Dawn. I mean, I imagine.
But more so than that, even she's like pretending with her friend that like, nothing went on. Like she didn't even catch the Jackie Kennedy thing on TV because they were too busy having the hanky panky.
Sure.
And I mean, it's like, yeah, she's like, I don't know, always living in this sort of playhouse where she like wants perceptions to
keeping
be,
up appearances.
Yeah, and
sure.
I mean, obviously that's true of like so many characters in this show, but in this episode, particularly Betty.
So with Don, I think there are two implications, right? There's this sort of thing that I think is pretty on the nose, that his health, like he's not young and he's not a young guy anymore. The difficulty in the bedroom has something to do maybe, with his physical lifestyle, drinking too much, smoking too much, and it's hurting him constitutionally. Huh?
2 packs a day.
Wait, that's me, but anyway. And I think there's something else going on here, though. I don't know if I buy it. Like, I think that's what the show is trying to message, or maybe that's what Don thinks is the problem, because, he's at the doctor for his insurance physical, and it makes you kind of wonder if, he thinks like that's one of the main reasons he wants to be there is because he doesn't know why he's struggling to perform, right? I honestly think what's going on here, and you guys feel free to tell me I'm a big old loser. He's uninvolved.
You're a big old loser.
Thanks. I think he keeps being reminded that she's his wife, and that, he can't quite buy into the fantasy of this independence that she's presenting. And I think that since the last season, since the wheel, he's made an effort to change himself. He's apparently not having any affairs right now. He's, trying to be the Don from like those photographs in the carousel. He is looking at like, instead of like what's young and new and exciting, I'm going to go back to the 50s. I'm going to try to like go back to that person I was, pretend that I'm young again. But instead of focusing on what's new, focusing on this new chapter of his life. And I think that disconnect between him and Betty has more to do. It's not that they're not attracted to each other. It's that he can't fool himself into thinking that they are like how they were when he gave her that fur coat. Like literally the Valentine from Sally is like right there on the nightstand. And like, I think that's killing his buzz.
I was just about to say that, because I felt like it was incidental that Valentine from Sally was the first thing or the last thing he saw. I mean, before he went to bed with Betty. And yeah, I mean, obviously that helped him as far as like the pitch that he was doing, and obviously fusing work and his home life. But I think he's just also thinking a lot about
cells.
Right.
Says who?
But I think, I mean, even more than that, I think he's also thinking about his own father in some way or another. Like, I think his own.
No
like,
wonder
fear.
he can't get around.
Well, true. But I mean, like, I think there is something going on where, like, I mean, I don't think it's incidental that, like, his parents were brought up in that physical they had. And the idea that, he's older than both of them. And certainly, I think, a few years away from where his dad was when he passed away. I think there is something psychologically happening with him. It's like, not only is he getting older, he's surpassing his parents, and he's like, and he's also, still grieving and reeling from the death of his brother Adam, and there is like this kind of stuff going on. I think, pathologically there too, that's preventing him from performing in some respect or another.
Yeah, I just think he may not even be able to fool himself now at this point. Like, I think he has so much disbelief in himself and what he's doing, even though he's trying so hard. It's like, it's not working, so he's probably blaming himself. So exactly what you're saying, John. He's wanting to go back to all these things that's just like not working. And I think we're gonna like see it fruition into just like a dramatic split of his psyche or his self, and that's exactly what this season seems like it's setting up.
One of the things I hope that happens in the season, I want to like it more. This for me has never been my favorite season. There are things though I really like about it. One of my favorite things about the season is Peggy. Peggy, I think, like what she goes through, her journey in this, and her mentorship with Don, I think is one of the most kind of satisfying things to watch. And this episode emblemizes it a lot. One of my least favorite things about this season is just Don himself. And I do get that listless sense of like Weiner's not sure exactly what to do with Don and is kind of experimenting with new things. And I don't know if there's that. It's kind of missing that confidence a little bit. And it's not even a complaint. It's just sort of like an observation, and that kind of fits the character in this moment. And it's one of those things that I hope I can appreciate a little bit more as we're watching this season, because I usually just like blast through it, honestly. I also don't like Duck very much, but I'm starting to see a little bit more of like some more interesting stuff about Duck that maybe I kind of, again, because I was binging the show so much, I never really slowed down with it enough to notice. Like, for example, so the whole thing with Don and Duck in this is that, Donald and Duck, Duck wants the agency to hire some kids, younger people younger than 25. And it's a clear reaction to like what the name of this episode references, which is For Those Who Think Young, which is the Pepsi campaign that came out in 1961. So they are addressing things that happened in 61, as you would expect. I actually watched one of those ads for the Pepsi ads, and it was very, very typical, standard 1960s stuff. But there's this like idea, like kids are drinking Pepsi, and I think like Duck is not so subtly calling to that. That's why Roger specifically is just like, For those who think young. So like, addressing the Pepsi campaign without addressing it, right? It's also kind of, in some small ways, referencing the Lemon campaign from Volkswagen that was discussed last season. So Duck kind of has, I think, like a really valid point of view on this, and is like, you know what, we need this. Like, we should hire these people. But the episode kind of frames it around like, Don's sort of reluctance to it. And you can almost sort of like see the way that the show is sort of, it does with Duck what it does with Pete a lot. Like whenever, like, bad news, the worst person in the world just made a good point, like that whole thing. I think they're kind of doing that with Duck here. And you even see it with how Roger is sort of like, I think he agrees with Duck. Like, I don't think it's like a big thing for him to go to Don and be like, yeah, that's a good idea. But I real quick, I do want to say about like why things are so heated between Duck and Don. My personal opinion on this, I forget if the season ever addresses it specifically, but I think it's pretty clear to me that they failed to bring in some big piece of business at one point. It could have been Kodak, in fact, after the whole carousel thing. And I think they blame each other. There's a whole thing where Don tells him, is like, now, if I do all this stuff for you, you can't blame me for when you can't bring in Martinson's coffee. And I think clearly something kind of major went down in the last year, and that's why things have soured so much. There's specifically the thing where Ken Cosgrove kind of references that Don has like the rope coiled around his neck, and put a pin on that imagery. The idea of I won't say anything else, but definitely a little moment there that's kind of hard to experience. We can call back to what happens with Adam, right? Because Adam hung himself. So I'm sure if Don had heard, Ken Cosgrove, imagine Don is standing right behind you, that whole thing.
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I agree with Don's character feeling a little listless this season. And I feel like part of it is because Widener's trying to create such an intense foil with him and Duck, with how headstrong Duck is, especially like in the workplace and how he thinks he should tackle accounts. So I think that definitely contributes to it. But Will, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, not that what you're saying isn't true, but I on a more kind of basic level, I feel like Duck sort of represents this authority and work figure that at this moment Don seems to be pushing away from. Like, as we see throughout this episode, Don seems to be avoiding work more often than not, in a way that he wasn't really in the first season. And obviously, I mean, part of that is that sort of like, I don't want to say like midlife crisis thing that's going on, but like there is a sort of like thing where I feel like part of what's going on with Don is also a fact that like I feel like he didn't really have a proper childhood, so he feels like he never really had to grow up. And so like, I mean, there's this whole thing where they name drop Pinocchio. And like obviously that movie's from like 1940 and this is like 1963 at this point. Where is it?
It's 1962. Pinocchio came out in 1940.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, it seemed not incidental that was name dropped because like that's like, sort of a boy who wants to be, like wants to be real, wants to grow up. And I feel like that's kind of true with has been with Don. He kind of wants to be this boy who like kind of magically grows up to be like a real boy, and it never really happened properly. And he's still putting on appearances, as we mentioned. The facade's kind of breaking. And I feel like with work, he's I don't know. It's just something, I mean, what was the name of the book that he was reading that he saw the guy at the bar?
I have it right here.
Okay, I was going to ask you.
In an Emergency, a book of poems by Frank O'Hara, published in 1957. One of my favorite books of poetry. It truly is wonderful. Highly, highly recommend.
Read it. Read it. Sure. Something. Pick one.
For grace after a party, you do not always know what I am feeling. Last night in the warm spring air, while I was blazing my tirade against someone who doesn't interest me, it was love for you that set me afire. And isn't it odd, for in rooms full of strangers, my most tender feelings writhe and bear the fruit of screaming. Put out your hand. Isn't there an ashtray suddenly there, beside the bed? And someone you love enters the room and says, wouldn't you like the eggs a little different today? And when they arrive, they are just plain scrambled eggs, and the warm weather is holding. So Frank O'Hara wrote this stuff just like in his everyday life. It's very much like Patterson. In fact, I think Patterson was like one of the major. I think one of Patterson's major inspirations was poets like Frank O'Hara.
Yeah. You're talking about the Jim Jarmusch movie,
the Jim Jarmusch film. Yeah. But it's wonderful, and I think there's something too. The whole thing with Don, where he's like, real quick, I got to say about the Pinocchio thing. I can't help but for me, the Pinocchio thing really came with Pete in this episode, like eating the chocolates and watching cartoons.
Oh yeah, well everyone's having the sex or trying to have the sex. He's just
he doesn't want to have
the
kids.
Chocolate. Yeah. Well, he's still. I mean, again, kind of similar weirdly to Don. He's still a kid at heart, and how can he have a kid when he's still a kid himself? Though, I mean, obviously the irony there is that he's already fathered a child with Peggy. An actual like the youngest person in the office, but is just treated as older than she already is.
Yeah, they're like, oh, you don't count.
Right.
There's a lot of disrespect at Peggy in this.
I gotta say though, I do hate it when I get chocolates that don't have the diagram and let me know what the chocolates are. So I really felt for Pete in that moment.
Oh my gosh. Meditations in an emergency, I think. So I think that this book of poetry is a great reference. If you wanted to read something while watching season 2, this is definitely something. I think the last episode is called "Meditations in an Emergency," and it very much
does it become big to Dawn? I don't remember really anything else related to meditating.
I think in general, I mean, it's clear to me that Weiner, huge fan of the book, because I think a lot of the characterization of Don post season 1 is based around this book of poetry. Particularly when it comes to like the way that Don just like lives his daily life, like going around making observations and, reflecting on things later through advertising. Like advertising is his poetry in some ways. So it's so funny, when he gets like pigeonholed in the bar where the guy is just like, I don't think he would like it. And, and it's like, it's kind of calling back to Hobo Code, right? Where like he is like, oh, I'm not one of the bohemians, I could, when I'm wearing, especially when I'm wearing this suit. So,
but anyway, what I was going to say before is that obviously like Pinocchio is a story about a boy who learns lessons about life just kind of through everyday circumstances. And it seems like, as you're mentioning, Don's someone who the tragedy and kind of flaw of him is that like, he doesn't really want to like he finds work in like the everyday moments, like you're saying, but he also is like trying to avoid work in this scenario, but like he never kind of fully turn it off. He has to constantly feel like he's working in some way or another, but he's also kind of avoiding those responsibilities. But yeah, he finds these little things, these meditations, as it were, that kind of indirectly and both directly help him out in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, the meditation of like the "I love you, Daddy" from Sally is what becomes instrumental in the pitch. You're gonna say, Mike?
I just like to imagine Weiner like in between, season 1 and 2, like he's having that crisis, not knowing to do with Dawn. He's having an emergency, so he just opens up this like he reads the poetry book, and he's just like, I got it. By golly, I got it.
Don literally, I just opened up to a random page, by the way. Like I wasn't preparing that, and literally the whole thing about like scrambled eggs, it's just scrambled eggs and like Don eating like that dish for Bobby, there's a lot of like people eating each other's food in this episode, by the way. Don eating at the bar, and then the whole thing where like he's eating the food that Betty orders, he's eating Bobby's food, and
I do love it when they actually eat on screen, because obviously from a production value, that's like the no, right? You always fucking fake eating your food because you're gonna have to do it a billion times. So
yeah,
whenever I see them actually going for it, I'm like, damn, you go, John Hamm.
All right, and
I was just gonna say about poetry, like it's kind of fitting, like so we mentioned with like Sopranos, like this is a successor, and the later seasons of Sopranos kind of relied a lot on poetry to kind of aid them and find inspiration. Like I think what's the guy's name? William Butler Yeats, I think his name. Like the Second Coming poem was like a big inspiration for
Gabagool.
The big poem Gabagool became a huge inspiration for the later seasons of Sopranos. And so I don't know. I mean, I just think that that's something that kind of infused itself from Sopranos into this new season, I guess, or the early seasons of Sopranos. or Mad Men.
I think that's a great segue into one of the linchpins of the episode. I mean, this episode has a lot of endings. There's the whole thing in the elevator, and then there's a whole thing where, Dawn sends the package off to somebody we don't know yet. There's like a nice little tag, at the end to be like, what's going on? There's a kind of like quasi reveal that Dawn isn't having an affair. He just goes home and like hangs out with his kid, which is like the biggest twist of the series so far. But before all that, there is the pitch, or it's kind of like a brainstorm session more than anything. Like it kind of starts as like a little pitch between Peggy and Dawn. Sal is there too. We can't forget that Sal has a new boo. He got married in the intervening year, and
so that was his wife?
Her husband.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I was making sure I heard that right, because I was just like, I thought they said wife, but yeah, I was just like, I wasn't sure. But obviously, his one moment with his wife, he's just like, where's John F. Kennedy?
I think people will hate her.
Who is having more sex? Pete, Sal, or Dawn?
None of the above.
Yeah. And why is it still Roger?
Right, yeah. And Joan gets some action in this episode.
I mean,
as is her, right?
I'll say Dawn because he's a bit masturbatory.
Oh wow. Okay. So
sorry, was that
that's
too
a word
harsh?
I don't know.
Oh boy.
I'm going to Google that word right now.
Anyway, go to Google Images, Mike. So there's the big thing where Peggy comes with Sal to Dawn to try to like redo the Mohawk campaign, because we didn't talk about it before, but earlier in the episode, Dawn, is super late to that meeting where they have all the pitches for Mohawk Airlines, and Paul Kinsey kind of like stumbles out the door. He goes first, stumbles out the gate, right, terminal, and he's just like, "There's a new chief in the sky." And since I know you wouldn't like that, he quickly goes to like, "We've got Boston surrounded," and he's like, "I got more Indian puns." And Dawn's like, "Stop writing for other writers. You have to write for people who don't have a sense of humor." I've literally used that line before in advertising, where I've just been like, I get it. Like, it's funny. Like that somebody will bring something to me and it's just like an idea, and I'm like, this is for like two people, and it's like those people are gonna love it. Everybody else, you're just gonna lose them. They're not gonna get it. I've dealt with that when editing film reviews. Like people will put like major, like one of the main themes of a film review will be this like very niche thing, and I'm like, I'm sorry, but it doesn't work. Will Ashton, I mean, no, never happened with you, Will.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. I was gonna say, I thought that would be a note that you got early on in life. Would be like you make all these quips and puns and jokes.
Oh yeah, very
bits.
early in my career. Everybody does. Everybody's kind of like, although where I work, like puns are almost never, a thing. But when they are, yeah, they get shut down pretty fast. But then, Peggy's like under Dale at this point, right? And Dale is kind of like, we haven't seen him, I don't think, since like that second episode of the last season. I don't remember when we saw him last. I think I vaguely remember him, or the only time I really remember him is when they do like the right guard, like deodorant spray. And I think he's in the room where they like tackle Ken. But since then, I think he's just been probably doing some other show. And he's back though, and he's like super checked out. I don't think he's on for a job, because Peggy just totally outshines him. Peggy outshines everybody in this episode. She's eager, in that whole like scene for the first Mohawk pitch. She's just like, we could do that, and then we could write something, and that would work. She's like if Advertising Age was a person, like, and we see her reading Advertising Age in the beginning of the episode when they play the "Let's Do the Twist Again," and yeah, I think that this is why I love Peggy in this season, is because like it's a little cringe, but it's also just wonderful to see her coming into her own, enjoying her job, having way more agency at this agency. I like it a lot. And then it culminates, of course, with how she is able to get that mentorship with Dawn after a whole episode where everyone's been shitting on her. Like the guys don't invite her to the meeting. They speculate about her being at a fat farm and knocking Dawn up, behind her back. They try to get her to do things like go get more glasses, go tell Dawn that, or go see if Dawn is around. He won't yell at her, just treating her like a kid, like a woman who doesn't have any power, like equality with them. She's the one who gets the mentorship with Dawn. Dawn is the one who sees something in her. And like Sal, you kind of get the sense from Sal where he's just like, am I interrupting something? It's just like, are you father and daughter? Like, it's a very charged scene, and I love it so much. What do you guys think of what did you bring me, Daddy? She says it in such a weird way.
I keep thinking about like the season 1 moments where they're all in Pete's office and they're all describing their relationship with Dawn, and it's all centered around, does he like me? And you don't see me working for it, but I am working for it. That's not Peggy's concern. Peggy's concern is, how the fuck can we do good advertising? And so I think that just genuine passion and like not maybe naivety, and like distaste for the office politics is just what helps her actually hone in on her craft. And that's why Don actually wants to help her. And that's why he's, actually putting his effort into it, because it's coming from such a genuine place. And it's so clear that that's what it is.
Yeah. And then there's also like that one scene where they're meeting outside of the office at that table. And they're like they're scoping out the new talent, or the younger people at least, that are coming into it. And they're like these like kind of judgmental, like older brothers, just like, who is this kid trying to win dad's affection or whatever. And they're, murmuring and disgruntled. And yeah, they're always outside looking in. Peggy, as you mentioned, is the only one that gets that moment inside the office with Dawn.
While they're doing that, she's working. Right. She's like that counter too to like what Mike was saying before about how like, or I think you, Will, were saying too, like how Don isn't working. He won't grow up. He won't,
Mm-hmm. But also with the lock too, like he's closing people off, and
he doesn't have an open door policy anymore for good reason. People were stealing his stuff. But no, Peggy comes in with that pitch, and I think she stands up to Don. Like, she has like an attitude, because I think, like Mike is saying, like, she doesn't care if he likes her. She cares about the idea. Obviously the season's going to continue challenging that. And like, she's going to be like learning from Dawn in ways that I don't think she expects. But, when she's just sort of like, I think it's sentimental. And like, Sal is just like, you want to die? Like, Dawn's going to stab you. And he's just like, no, she's right. But then he just like, he gently, constructively eviscerates her, but in a way that I think like she respects. Like, she's just like, this is what I'm here for. I want to learn. I want to be like called out on my shit. And Dawn is sort of like, I want somebody to challenge me, to stand up to me. That's the thing that like Paul would never do. He's just going to go on to get along. He's asleep. Where is he? He's sick that day, even though they know that they were supposed to deliver that day. So I think it's just like, it's one of those things where the show really comes into its own, for me at least.
I do also think part of it is, sorry, Will. I do think a part of it also, though, is a little bit of Don's ego, because he's having such a hard time reestablishing his persona of Don Draper that he is getting satisfaction in molding, part of himself within Peggy, right?
Having power over the youth.
Exactly.
Yeah, she's only 22. She's feeling 22. But so then the pitch itself is just sort of, it starts with like, where are you going? And he's just like, where are you going? I love Don so much in that scene. But, he has that whole spiel, of like, you are the product, and like, this is what actually sells things. And, the whole like sex sells thing. I've definitely, again, I know I promised you guys I would call back to my advertising career as much as possible, but I've been on both sides of this. I've been the Peggy, I've been the Don, and more recent years, I've been the Don in the situation where somebody will come to me and just be, like, I don't think this works, or I don't believe in this, or they don't believe in something that like I've advocated for, and I've had to like wax philosophical a bit. A lot of it's bullshit, but there is like something to that flow, that's sort of just like having to defend yourself articulately, almost through poetic delivery. And that's why I love that, whenever the show weaves in poetry, because I think there is like a poetry to advertising. There's like a sort of like, a half, not half measure or half assery of it, but it's just sort of like the deliberate like editing out of ideas, like when you try to present your case and like simplifying it down to like raw emotion. That's kind of like what poetry is. And there's something very like poetic about the best kinds of advertising, even though advertising is soulless. But yeah, that's my little insight.
Good.
Do you think that like advertising in the modern age has become less about like the observation of the human experience that like I would say all good copy really is, and like a little bit more to focus on like focus groups and like statistics just to feed the fucking burning fire of capitalism.
I think that's more in like content creation and content marketing these days. I think where we see a lot of the sort of pointed observational poetic advertising, weirdly enough, and I hate to say this, it comes into the things that people are creating to go viral. That is where I think that's existing right now. It's not in billboards. It's not even on like online ads or anything. All of that stuff has just become noise. But I think like the real sort of like the youths are coming in to make TikTok videos that are ads, but you don't know they're ads. It's stuff like that. And it's like figuring out, people are in conversations right now in boardrooms who are like, how do we get people to buy this pillow? You know, we're going to Nathan Fielder it. We're going to create something out of nothing. We're going to create an internet thing out of nothing, out of whole cloth, and it's going to eventually lead to money for us.
I did see an advertisement, and I just thought it was just, it felt so different from exactly what you're saying, I guess. With TikTok, you don't know our ads. But I think it's okay to say, I saw this Nike ad the other day, just after someone had broke a speed record, and it was just a close-up of his face, and the copy is, "The human race just got faster." And that was like the first time in a long time I read something, and I was just like, holy shit. Like,
that's good.
This is great. This is really good. Anyways, felt like poetry.
Yeah, you don't get that a lot these days, right? I was at an airport in Paris when we were on our honeymoon, and my wife and I were sitting there, and we were kind of just like looking at, we're like waiting for our food and everything, and I looked over at the M&M's ad. It's just like this big poster thing, and I asked her, I was just like, what are they trying to do there? It was something along the lines like fun for all for fun, something like that. And I was just kind of like, what brought that line about? Because that's a line that feels very much like the fifth thing on the list that they didn't really want, but it was like the safe version. And anyway, that's a whole tangent. We don't have to dissect an M&M's ad right now.
Anyway, I like that talk though. I like the advertising talk. It's fun.
Sorry. Well, I know it's a little extra.
Yeah. Although, I mean, not probably as profound as what the art you guys were talking about, but so a piece of marketing that I appreciated recently that ties to baseball. Mike, did you see the Smile advertisements that they've been doing at these baseball fields where they get the actors from the new
that was pretty fun.
Smile, and they have them smiling in direct lineage to the camera, and they don't say like smile in theaters now, but you see these actors like, what's going on there? And that's like obviously like what you're kind of talking about. It's like trying to create a viral moment related to the film, but it's also subtle enough to where it doesn't feel like I'm being advertised. And so it's like, I thought that was neat.
It comes out of that anxiety, right? Of like, our real lives are so dominated by the content we consume, so that like when something like that can creep into a moment you weren't expecting, that's when it's most effective. All right. We've covered a lot. Was there anything else? I mean, we talked about Betty, we talked about Peggy, we talked about what's going on with Dawn and Duck. There is that whole thing where, Joan has a moment with Roger, and she's obviously dating somebody now, a doctor who Roger insists is Jewish, Roger. And Joan spends a lot of this episode being like, I don't know where to put the Xerox machine, this machine that's going to replace pretty much all the jobs that these women have. She eventually puts it in Peggy's office. And I took it as, I was curious what you guys thought of this. I took it as like her punishing Peggy for, scolding Lois. Is that how that's how you took it, Mike?
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And I think there's probably a little bit of off camera. I would assume some off camera, in the past year as Peggy has become, one of the, frankly, one of the boys in the office, a little bit above her. There's a little bit of resentment probably built in there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, in addition to that, I just felt like it was pretty much still the resentment that she had from the end of season 1, as far as Peggy having her own office and some, she's trying to limit that space as much as possible. But yeah.
Sure. There's also sort of like there's this thing with Carla toward the end that I didn't want to miss, where Carla is coming back from season 1, and, she's the main nanny for Bobby and Sally. And there's a point where like Dawn is just like, I go drive you to the station, and she like looks at his drink, like he's like literally just pouring whiskey into a glass, and she's just like, no thanks. I like the fresh air. So there's like clearly like a sort of she keeps her distance, from the Drapers a bit in a very smart survival way, because that's an accident waiting to happen. And that's about all I had. I mean, we had the whole Jackie Kennedy thing, the White House tour, kind of merging into this episode's events, which I thought was fun.
That was just so hard to watch, just with everything that's happening on TikTok with Jackie Kennedy currently. It just was a melding of different cultural.
What's happening on TikTok with Jackie Kennedy?
Oh, everybody, like, the whole joke of Jackie Kennedy is that she fucking likes to eat metal, or like tin cans. And so it's just a bunch of like Jackie Kennedy going like, nah, 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 and like, oh yeah, just literally go into TikTok and search.
You've lost me, Michael Overhauls. I gotta look this up. I mean, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, listen to the youth, John. I'm that.
I can't do it. They're drinking Pepsi. I'm drinking coffee.
John, I was about to say, we're the older ones. Mike's the youngest kid. We gotta listen to the kids. This is what they're into now, I guess.
Clearly.
Wait, Will, how old are you?
I'm 29.
Okay, so we're not too far.
I know, but you're still the youngest of the three.
John's the old head,
and you're the one. You're getting close to 36 there.
I'm about to turn 32 in a couple of weeks, so there you go. But I'm almost done with my Baskin Robbins age. But did you guys have anything else in the episode? You got something, Will?
No, I was trying to get that pun because I don't eat ice cream, but then it's like 32 flavors. I get it.
31 flavors. That's
31
no
flavors.
Wonder you clearly don't.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I did relate to the whole thing where it's like the youths aren't drinking coffee anymore. They're drinking Pepsi because I don't drink coffee. I was like, yeah, that's true. But
you don't drink coffee at all?
No, I don't drink coffee.
That is not true.
Fuck that shit. No, I hate coffee. I despise coffee. No, that's
not
a joke.
Then what do you drink? Do you drink tea? Like some kind of poet?
This is iced tea. I don't know if you can see it in my cup.
Oh, hey, my parents have those cups.
Mike, I have a question for you. A question that Will would never answer out of protest, but
yeah, sure.
Baskin Robbins or Cold Stone?
Oh, what's the occasion? Is it you're just on the way
100
home?
100 degrees out, middle of the day. Let's say it's like 4 or 5 o'clock. You missed lunch or something, but you don't want to eat like a full meal, or you just want a little treat for you.
Yep, Baskin Robbins for sure. That absolutely is the recipe for that. Cold Stone.
Okay.
Cold Stone is it's like an event ice cream for me. Like, oh man, we just got out of a great movie, or like, oh, what a fun day on the boat.
What an awesome baseball game, Big Dumper.
Yeah, it's very extra.
All right, we can go back to the episode because Will literally stepped away at the huffing and puffing because he hates ice cream so much, and he's like, forget this ice cream talk. I don't know.
People from Pittsburgh are fucking weird, dude.
Will's trying to like yell at us, but he's on mute. He doesn't even know it.
Sorry, yeah. No, I was checking my phone. I was like, you guys are talking ice cream. I have nothing to contribute to this whole thing. But I mean, I will step to my city's defense. Certainly my neuroses and eccentricities have little to do with the city as far as ice cream and coffee are concerned.
Okay.
But yeah.
But let's finish out our convo on Mad Men. And did you guys have anything else? Go ahead.
I do actually. I'm curious. Will, who at this point, because obviously John and I know, who do you think Don sent the book to?
Well, I was just about to ask. Yeah, I mean that's so that's a mystery. Okay, I didn't know if that was supposed to be kind of a closed ambiguity. That's something that's going to be tied up later.
Because he writes on the note like it made me think of you. So like
right, yeah,
I know. Stranger, yeah.
But I mean, other shows have certainly, and even Mad Men have in the past, like done things like this and not really tied them up. So I didn't know if that was going to be resolved later on, or if that was something you were just supposed to assume. I mean, I feel like Rachel
remember it taking a while.
Okay,
for them to tie it up, but yeah, they do tie it up.
I mean, Rachel, I guess, makes the most sense, but I don't know. I mean, that seems a little too obvious for what's going on. What's Maggie Siff's character? What's her name?
Midge.
Midge. I'm gonna say Midge.
Okay, so that's your guess, and then we'll have to revisit this when we find out.
I will just say, I think that's what makes this show so good too. Is that like, right? It definitely makes you feel like you can guess like who it is. I don't know. It's good writing, and we definitely should, like, just remember this conversation.
All right. I guess I was going to ask about the elevator thing. I mean, the clear thing about like when Don's in the elevator and the guys are being like total, jagoffs, and like the woman is clearly uncomfortable, and there's a whole thing where he's like, take your hat off, and It's calling again back to like he wants, that sort of like gentlemanly sort of thing. I was curious though what you think the function of the scene is. Is it Don just continuing to rebel against the younger generation? Is it sort of showing that like, Don has a point to this approach to life, that it's not always like bad, and so he's like, maybe Weiner's trying to like avoid making it a black and white thing. What did you guys have any observation on that before we close this out? I got nothing.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think it's supposed to emphasize both Don's like against rebellion against the youth, but also that the youth, like in Don's defense, do suck a little. Like they're just not old enough to understand how rude they're being. But I mean, every generation has it, right? Every generation is going to look at the one behind it. I think the same thing of Gen Z all the time, and just think like, oh, you just don't get it. You're not old enough. You don't have the experience. Like you don't understand that what you're doing right now is just like so rude or something. Just highlighting that it happens in every generation. It happened in the '60s. It's happening now.
I think in some respect or another, Don is a man of principles, and even though he does sort of deplorable behavior behind closed doors, I think he is someone who, wants to respect social norms. He believes that, when there's a lady present and you're in an elevator, you take your hat off and you don't talk about ladies' underwear and other, inappropriate things with some woman that you don't know. So I think, I think obviously he's rebelling against the youth. I think he's kind of pushing against his own sort of insecurities about the age, but he's also just like, come on, guys, there's a time and a place for this kind of conversation, and it's not in this elevator with this nice lady in front of us. So
sure,
that's what I think.
Yeah, we didn't really touch on the whole thing with the two young guys, one of them wearing that big sweater and that wonderful, Chris Evans from Knives Out sweater. Those guys seem fun. They had a nice little moment.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Don made a good point. That a good question to ask during a job interview is, "Have you ever been fired?"
Which is a weird thing to ask somebody who's like as young as they are, because it's like,
right?
It's like we don't want people to know we're meeting. It's like, ooh, okay, Mr. Hot Commodity, all right.
Yeah. But, also, I was gonna say, one of the guys in the elevator is Scott MacArthur, who is one of the main antagonists on The Righteous Gemstones, which I know is a show that John hasn't watched. But I don't know have you watched Righteous Gemstones, Mike?
I love The Righteous Gemstones.
It's such a good show. Yeah.
I am shocked.
I couldn't get into it. I tried.
How couldn't you?
It's way too
with your background. Yeah,
I know. That's the thing. That's why Will recommended it.
Yeah, that's what I said to John. I said the same thing, Mike.
It rings false to me. I don't know.
Okay. Here's the thing. As far as what you told me, you just said you couldn't get past the language, which is
I'm saying. It's like it rings false. Like I don't know. It's just not that world to me. Like I think that world, there's something very delicate about it, and I think that the show is just so out there about it. It's like so over the top that I'm just like
Did you enjoy The Eyes of Tammy Faye?
Yeah, I think The Eyes of Tammy Faye kind of nailed it. Because I think specifically with the depiction of Falwell, I think Vincent D'Onofrio was spot on, because like I knew him in person, and like I think like that to me is like that balance of like there's something very absurd about this whole thing, but it's not always absurd. And I don't know, Righteous Gemstones, I don't know. I only gave it one episode a chance, so I don't know.
Okay, well, you definitely need to watch more than that, because I will say most Danny McBride shows, they do kind of take a little while to get their rhythm. I mean, certainly that was the case with Eastbound Down and Vice Principals before this. But I will say, I thought Eyes of Tammy Faye was fine. And I'm not going to disparage Vincent D'Onofrio's performance in that film. But I feel like watching that film and watching Honk for Jesus, Save Your Soul, both times just like, man, if Righteous Gemstones didn't come out, I probably would respect these movies more. But we have Righteous Gemstones, and this show is just knocking both of them out of the water.
Welcome back to Righteous Gemstones Men, the weekly show where we talk about a show. Okay, I think that should do it then for this episode of Mad Men Men. Next week, we're going to be talking about Flight 1, which I'm very curious, Will, if you remember anything from this episode, but we'll have to wait and see because, you don't think you saw it?
I can say with certainty I've not watched at least a full episode.
This is it. We're kind of getting in. We're getting into uncharted territory. Look out for Will Ashton. We got him surrounded. So this is it.
Yeah, I'm getting on the plane and traveling places anew.
Yep, that's right. Leaving the city of knowing things behind you. But all right, we'll be back next week. Thank you all for listening. This has been Mad Men Men.